Does that look like a dream place to live? Well, today we're gonna talk about the 5 things that we worried about most when moving right here to Lake Oswego.
And how they panned out.
Well, let's go. My name's Aaron Cullen. This is Brianna Cullen. And together we have a real estate company right here in Lake Oswego. Now today we're on the bridge here of Oswego Lake. If it looks beautiful out, it's because, hey, it is beautiful out. This is one of the magical things about living in Lake Oswego, is having access to these amazing views. If you have a lake easement, you can get a ride on it. Or if not, make friends with a lake easement.
Honestly, no matter how beautiful and picturesque it looks, moving is a big deal, and it tends to bring up all kinds of fears and doubts. And so today we wanted to get a little bit personal and talk about some of the things that we were worried about when we were deciding to move here. A lot of these are like very personal and specific to us, but I think hearing them will help you understand that like we really get how big of a deal this move is and really want to help our clients through that whole process. So for me personally, I tend to make my best decisions, especially those big decisions, like on gut. It's like a gut decision. But that doesn't mean that my brain doesn't throw out like every single obstacle and try to justify whether my gut is making a good decision or not. And so some of these worries are pretty superficial and a little embarrassing, honestly. And then some of them are just more like everyday personal choices. The first worry, this is kind of on the more embarrassing side, was whether we would be judged for moving to the Beverly Hills of Portland.
And seeing some of these houses behind us on the lake, you can see why. I mean, some of these houses are just gorgeous, but you're gonna pay anywhere from $3.5 million on up to $10 million for a lot of these houses on the lake.
This like concern is one of those concerns that I feel like once we moved here, it evaporated immediately. And the truth is, yes, some people do judge you for living here or for choosing to live here. There is definitely a element of Portland that is way more hip and urban and gritty, and they kind of think you're selling out for living in Lake Oswego, I would say.
Yep.
Even so, I have always really appreciated living in a really beautiful place. When Aaron and I met, I actually did live in the real Beverly Hills.
And I live from Beverly Hills adjacent over in West Hollywood.
The truth is, some people do think that Lake Oswego is snooty or too suburban, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is your day-to-day life and whether you enjoy living here. We love it here so much that like worrying about what other people think is kind of irrelevant. I think worrying about what other people think also kind of reveals some of your own concerns. So I think I did have concerns that it would be a little bit too homogeneous here and that all of the affluence would create a vibe of like keeping up with the Joneses. And I've mentioned that before. I think you definitely can get caught up in that when you're living in an area with a lot of affluence where people are taking extremely fancy vacations and spending a lot of money on things. That's something that you do have to know what your own values are and act accordingly.
I personally was not worried about that at all. I like living in nice places. I don't see that there's anything wrong with that. Before we moved here, when I was researching, hey, what neighborhoods in Portland would we like to live in? For me, it was really all about the lake and being a little bit out of the city, but still being close enough to the city. That's kind of what I did on my research before we decided to move here. And Lake Oswego just kept popping up for me personally, because I love being near the water. I love that it's right next to the river and it has a lake. And the homes were bigger. That's what I wanted as well. And the schools were very highly rated. So it really just checked a lot of boxes for me. I never really thought about it being the Beverly Hills of Portland.
The truth is there's a lot of really beautiful areas of Portland that are just as expensive as Lake Oswego. And like Aaron said, it depends on what you're looking for. If you want more of that city urban environment, some of those areas like, you know, Irvington, Alameda, Ladd's Addition could be perfect for you. I love being on the edge of the rolling farmland and being able to get out to nature really easily. And so this is just a perfect mix for us. Concern number 2 was choosing the right house, the right neighborhood, or fear of like choosing the wrong house. So before we moved here, we were living in LA and we knew that we were getting close to wanting to make a change. We'd had our first child and we were looking for a little bit more of a small town feel. And so we were looking at a couple of different places in the US, and really it was the house that we found in Lake Oswego that helped make our decision.
I was the first one who fell in love with the house that we ended up buying in Lake Oswego. Like many of you, I started my home search online, found what I thought was the perfect house. It looked just beautiful, so I took a quick trip out here. I won't bore you with all the details, but as soon as I walked down First and A Street and went to Millennium Plaza, the big fountain right there, and then looked over at the lake, I was like, this is it. I was like, I would love to live here, kind of like a dream town. And a lot of people say that when they get here if they've never been here. It's just gorgeous here. I just couldn't believe it. And I was like, wow, we could actually live here.
But it was the house that first drew us. And then, of course, once we started thinking about moving to Lake Oswego and that was a possibility, then I started like scouring Redfin for all the other houses that were on the market and wondering, is this really the best house? Is this really the best neighborhood? And I remember having a conversation with our realtor at the time, looking at what else was on the market. And I asked her, if we don't buy this house, will we find another house like this? And she just was like very candid, and she's like, no. And I was like, well, I totally thought she would say, oh yeah, another house like this will come along. And she was like, no. And she's right. Part of that is because all the homes in Lake Oswego are so unique. It's not a master planned community. There aren't a bunch of similar homes. Everything has a little bit different of a feel. And so she was like, if you love this house, there aren't a lot of other homes just like this. And so that helped me make the decision. But I think for a lot of our clients and for anyone, it's scary to be like, okay, this is the one. You know, you're only gonna have one home that you live in day to day. And so it's just a big decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can see that just by looking around us, like all these homes are very unique. You can see the lake right through there, and this house right next to it here, like they have a side lawn, and then the lake right out in the front, and then this house at the end has a little cul-de-sac, but there's some neighbors, with some parking right here. So every house is like a little unique. It's not a master plan community, which is a draw for me. I'm not a huge fan myself of master plan communities where every house looks the same, but it can make it harder to find a house because, you got to kind of figure out, hey, what do you like? What are you attracted to? And things can move quickly. It depends on the season of housing market, how long things stay on the market. But if you see something you really like, you definitely want to act fast.
The sort of after effect of how we feel about it, I think no house or neighborhood is absolutely perfect. And you could also say there are just so many great neighborhoods and beautiful areas in Lake Oswego. Sometimes I'll go over to a friend's house and think like, wow, this street is just so special.
Yeah.
I would love to live on this street. And at the same time, like I love our home. I'm so excited about continuing to fix it up and make it more and more comfortable. And so a lot of it is just deciding that you made the right choice and making the most of it.
There's a lot of older stock in Lake Oswego, and by older stock, I mean maybe 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. A lot of them are gonna need some updating.
Okay, so this last concern is actually very personal to me. And it is buying too big of a house for what we might need. And how that came up for me is that we'd had our first child and we were ready to start trying to have baby number 2. And we had struggled with fertility to get pregnant the first time. And so I was really nervous about what if we aren't able to have another child and we bought this like 4-bedroom house and it feels too empty and it feels like sad to me that I couldn't fill it up with kids. That was really something that I worried about a lot. I don't know if you remember me saying like, what if these other bedrooms are empty? And that's always gonna be really hard for me. We moved forward. Aaron was much more grounded about this and we moved forward. And then as we were closing on the house, we did a frozen embryo transfer that didn't take. And so like this emotion was like really big and alive for me. And then we moved up here and I was very focused on getting pregnant. Like we did a round of IVF, I think in September and we moved up here in July. And then that didn't take either. And so it was I was really going through it with that. Later that winter, we got pregnant with our son, and our house, like we use every room in our house.
Yeah.
And Aaron wishes we had like one more room.
Like one more room.
I think it's one of those concerns that obviously I would have been heartbroken to not have that second kid, whether we had a big house or a small house. It was just one of the kinds of fears that come up when you're making a big decision and you're worrying about every little thing. That may be like nothing you can relate to at all, but there's probably something for you that feels very like personal and scary about moving.
You know, you have an idea of how many rooms you need and how big a house you need, but I find especially here in the Pacific Northwest, and especially if you're moving from a sunnier place that maybe has smaller homes typically, it's nice to have extra space, extra rooms, even if you're not sure you're gonna need it. You know, if it's raining, it's more, more cold in the winter, it's nice to have an indoor place where kids can play. Or if you don't have kids, where you can spread out. Maybe you have an exercise room in there, or maybe you want a full dedicated guest room, or you and your partner both work from home and you both want an office. Like, you can see how you can quickly fill up a house and use those spaces. And especially now after COVID, you know, during COVID, everybody wanted a bigger house because everyone was working from home. Well, we're still seeing that trend. A lot of people are still wanting that bigger home. They're still working from home. And if you guys are thinking about moving here, there's a good likelihood that you also are gonna be working from home. So it's kind of nice to have that extra space.
Yeah, and choose your office carefully, because every time Aaron comes into my office, he looks around and thinks like, oh, this is a really good office. I think I would trade.
She got the big dedicated office, so I took a bedroom, converted it to an office. I'm not complaining. I still have a view of the water fountain there in the backyard, but she does have a really nice office with a lot of windows.
Okay, so this next worry is not specific to me. This is something we hear from all of our clients who are thinking about moving to the Pacific Northwest, and that is the weather.
The weather, yes. So were you worried about the weather?
I was worried about the weather, and I was just gonna say, like,
I wasn't worried about the weather.
It's not like you, Aaron, in this video is really coming across as like, I have no fears, I have no concerns. But it's kind of true in this particular decision. He really listened to his gut and didn't let these fears get in the way. And I think that is something that you really help your clients with, is to focus on the big picture and what they really want. And you were very focused on that. You were not worried about the weather at all. Also, you had never lived here, and I had lived in Portland.
But I'd lived in places, you know, originally from New York, I lived in the Midwest. So, you know, I've lived in places that had more of a winter and that rained more. I like a little bit of weather, and I've always known that about myself. I enjoy that, the differences in having climate. So I was actually pretty excited about that, from moving from Southern California, to have a little bit of change of weather, because I personally don't like hot all the time.
Yeah, and I grew up in Arizona, so I just grew up with a lot of sunshine year round. And I know that blue sky really makes me happy. I'm a Leo. I feel like I need a lot of blue sky and sunshine. But honestly, I love having 4 seasons here. So how beautiful it is today in the middle of July is just that much sweeter, because it's not like this all the time. And because we do have those darker days in the winter, and it's gloomier and rainier, and there's like a beauty to that too. People here know how to get cozy, like really experience that winter festivity, especially here in Lake Oswego. The holidays feel so festive, starting in, you know, mid-October when the leaves are changing, all the way through New Year's. You really get into the spirit because of the changing seasons. And then same with the spring. Like when it starts to brighten up in Portland in the spring, people are just ecstatic and exuberant to be out in the weather. And so
that's true.
I would say, yes, there are some harder days in the winter where you're getting a little tired of it. Definitely, if you can, take a vacation somewhere sunny and warm in like the February, March timeframe. Give yourself that to look forward to. That made a big difference to us this year. But overall, I think the weather, it might even be a pro in some ways. It's definitely not like a full con.
And when it comes to worrying about moving, one example of our clients that when they moved here from Southern California, they had a lot of their family on one side live there. She grew up there in Los Angeles. The husband didn't. So he was more on board with, hey, starting over, starting fresh. Guess what?
Putting down roots in their own place.
Exactly. And guess what? After they moved to Lake Oswego, she saw how kind of family centric it is. and just a beautiful, easy place to get around. She's loving it.
And her family comes up and visits. It's not like they never see them. I think
That's
she's
right.
going down with their daughter for a couple of weeks in August, and it's a really easy trip to a lot of places in California and on the West Coast. And so sometimes it's just about trying it and saying like, let's take the leap and see what happens. That's true with life in general, with moving, with career, with partnership.
That's right. And what's the worst that happens? We have had some friends out here that moved out here from San Diego, and they decided, hey, it was just a little too rainy for them, a little too dark. And so after about 2.5, 3 years, they decided to move back.
I think it was more like 18 months, and I don't think they gave it like enough of a chance.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. Some people decide, you know, this isn't really what I'm looking for. Or we have friends who moved into Lake Oswego from the South Bay area in LA, and then a few months ago they decided they want to be in Portland, and they moved into a really cool neighborhood in the Northeast. They wanted more of that city experience. And so you're not stuck. It is a big decision, and I get that it feels like permanent, but it's not permanent.
And I was actually fortunate enough to be able to help some other clients of ours be able to buy that house from our friends to help them make that move to a different part of Portland.
And those clients moved here from Santa Monica and are so thrilled to be in that house. And so it just kind of goes full circle. Anything else for you about weather? I mean, you do have some pretty grumpy days midwinter.
That's true. And that's why I gotta say, you gotta get out in February. Get out, go to somewhere sunny, go to Hawaii, go to the desert, you know, just go somewhere in February.
And then the last concern really has to do with you making a big career transition when we were moving up here.
Yeah, and I'd say that was, you know, probably my biggest concern. It was still minimal. It wasn't a huge concern. I've been doing real estate for the last 10 years now. I was doing it for 5 years while we were living in Los Angeles, but I was also still working as an editor, a producer for movie trailers and TV promos at the same time. And I was doing, you know, real estate investing, doing flips, we were doing rentals. I just found myself slowly liking to do that more often. When we moved here, I was like, okay, you know, I'm gonna have to transition out of my Hollywood career and into something else. I love doing real estate, so why don't I help other people buy a home? That's what I made, you know, the full career move here 5 years ago into helping people like you find a place here.
And just to put it a little bit in perspective too, 5 years ago was pre-pandemic, and so remote work was not as easily accepted. I actually had a fully remote job, which was one of the things that made it possible for us to move up here. But most people at that time didn't. Most people were working in offices. And so you making that decision to go all in on real estate wasn't as if that didn't work out, you would like find another remote job based somewhere else and do that. It was like really committing and deciding this is what you're gonna do.
That's right. This is what I'm doing. And I'm a Capricorn, and when I commit to something, I'm gonna put in the work, and I'm gonna do one day, then the next day, then the next day, and let it build. So I felt pretty confident it was gonna work out. And if it didn't, I was open to what direction I would find, you know, within the real estate world. But as it turns out, we're doing great. We're both in the business, and here we are.
Look at you bringing in your astrological sign today. Aaron is such a Capricorn. But yeah, that really sums up our 5 biggest worries about moving here. Let us know your astrological sign in the comments.
Yeah, there you go, comments right down there. Any of this resonates with you guys and you have questions, you want to talk things through, go ahead and reach out. My information's right down there in the description area. Or hey, if you want to talk to Bri instead of me, go ahead and say that. Not a big deal. And if you found a lot of value in this video, check out the next one coming up right now.